The ancient scribes who penned the earliest chapters of Genesis knew something we've forgotten. They weren't writing mythology or allegory, they were recording memories so ancient, so earth-shattering, that their true meaning has been buried beneath centuries of interpretation and misunderstanding. What they described was a world so radically different from our own that modern science is only now beginning to glimpse its possibility. Imagine a planet where humans lived for nearly 1,000 years, where giants walked among men, where the very atmosphere itself was different, creating a greenhouse paradise that knew no seasons, no storms, no death from old age, where technology and spiritual knowledge had advanced to levels that would seem impossible today. This wasn't the primitive, barbaric world we've been taught to imagine. This was a civilization that may have surpassed our own. The Hebrew word used in Genesis for the pre-flood world is olam haba, literally meaning the world that was. Not the world that might have been or the world of myth, but the world that actually existed. And according to these ancient accounts, it was destroyed so completely that only 8 humans survived to tell the tale. But here's what's haunting about these records. They're not unique to the Bible. Every ancient civilization on Earth has flood stories. The Mesopotamians called it the time of Zusudra. The Greeks spoke of Deucalion's flood. The Hindu Puranas describe the deluge of Manu. Native American tribes from the Pacific Northwest to the Amazon have detailed accounts of a great flood that destroyed the first world. Over 500 distinct flood narratives exist across human cultures, often containing remarkably similar details. What did these ancient peoples know that we've forgotten? And why have these stories been relegated to the realm of mythology when the evidence suggests they might be describing actual history? The book of Genesis tells us that in the beginning, God created a firmament, a dome-like structure that separated the waters above from the waters below. Most modern readers skip past this detail, but ancient Hebrew scholars understood its profound implications. This firmament, they believed, was a crystalline canopy that surrounded the entire earth, creating a pressurized atmosphere unlike anything we know today. Dr. Joseph Dillow, an atmospheric physicist, has calculated what conditions would have been like under such a canopy. The increased atmospheric pressure would have pushed oxygen levels to nearly 35% compared to today's 21%. The greenhouse effect would have created a global tropical climate with no polar ice caps, no deserts, and no seasonal variations. Most remarkably, the increased atmospheric pressure would have provided natural protection against cosmic radiation, dramatically extending human lifespans. This isn't just speculation. Ice core samples from Antarctica show that atmospheric conditions were radically different in the ancient past. Amber fossils reveal insects of impossible sizes, dragonflies with 3-foot wingspans, beetles the size of small birds, creatures that could only exist in a high-oxygen environment. Even more telling, scientists have discovered that when modern insects are raised in high-oxygen chambers, they grow to sizes matching these ancient specimens. But the Genesis account tells us something even more extraordinary. It describes a world where the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The offspring of these unions were called the Nephilim, giants who became mighty men of old, men of renown. For centuries, theologians have debated the identity of these sons of God. Some suggest they were the descendants of Seth, the righteous line of humanity. Others point to the book of Enoch, considered scripture by the early church but later removed from the biblical canon, which explicitly identifies these beings as angels who abandoned their heavenly realm to take human wives. The book of Enoch provides disturbing details about what happened next. These fallen angels, called Watchers, taught humanity forbidden knowledge. Azazel taught men to make weapons of war. Semjaza revealed the secrets of magic and divination. Barakel taught astrology. Kokabel showed the constellations. Others taught makeup and jewelry, pharmaceutical knowledge, and the cutting of roots, modernist, possibly referring to genetic manipulation. This wasn't just cultural advancement. According to Enoch, this was the systematic corruption of human DNA through supernatural intervention. The giants born from these unions weren't simply tall humans. They were hybrid beings with strength and abilities far beyond normal human limitations. Genesis describes these Nephilim as Gibberim, a Hebrew word meaning mighty ones or heroes, but with connotations of violence and tyranny. Archaeological evidence for such beings continues to surface, despite academic reluctance to discuss it. In the 1950s, excavations in Ecuador uncovered human skeletons measuring over 9 feet tall. The Smithsonian Institution's own records from the late 1800s document the discovery of giant human remains across North America, though these artifacts have mysteriously disappeared from public view. Ancient Mesopotamian tablets refer to kings who ruled for thousands of years, possessing supernatural strength and wisdom. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence comes from genetic research. Scientists have discovered that human DNA contains what they call junk DNA, genetic sequences that serve no apparent function. Some researchers propose this could be remnant code from ancient genetic manipulation. More disturbing still, recent advances in genetic engineering are allowing us to create human-animal hybrids and extend human lifespans in ways that eerily echo the capabilities described in these ancient texts. Hey there, history seekers. Welcome back to Professor Archive, where we uncover the hidden stories that shaped our world. Before we dive deeper into this fascinating topic, I'm curious, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? Drop a comment and let me know. Also, what's your profession? I love seeing how people from all walks of life connect with these ancient mysteries. If you're enjoying this journey into forbidden history and want to support the channel, consider leaving a super thanks. It really helps us continue bringing these incredible stories to light. Now let's get back to the antediluvian world. The technological capabilities of the pre-flood world may have exceeded our own in ways we're only beginning to understand. Ancient Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki possessing flying vehicles called whirlwinds that could travel between Earth and the heavens. The Book of Ezekiel provides technical descriptions of craft with wheels within wheels, powered by some form of energy that produced sound and light effects. The ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata, contains detailed accounts of vimanas, flying machines capable of traveling at incredible speeds and even reaching other planets. These weren't primitive peoples with overactive imaginations. The mathematical and astronomical knowledge embedded in structures like the Great Pyramid of Giza demonstrates understanding of physics that we've only recently rediscovered. The builders knew the exact circumference of the Earth, the speed of light, and the distance to the sun, encoded directly into the pyramid's measurements. How did ancient civilizations possess such knowledge without modern instruments? The answer may lie in what the Book of Enoch calls the corruption of all flesh. According to this account, the fallen angels didn't just teach forbidden knowledge, they used it to systematically corrupt the genetic code of every living thing on Earth. Animals were crossbred to create chimeric creatures. Plants were altered beyond their natural design. Even human DNA was so thoroughly corrupted that by the time of Noah, only his family retained pure genetic lineage. This wasn't random mutation or natural evolution. Ancient texts describe a deliberate program of genetic manipulation designed to corrupt God's original creation beyond recognition. The Hebrew word shachat, used in Genesis to describe the pre-flood world, means to corrupt or to destroy, but it specifically refers to genetic corruption. The same word is used elsewhere in the Old Testament to describe the mixing of different kinds of seeds or the crossbreeding of different species of animals. Modern genetic research has uncovered evidence that human DNA has indeed been altered in the ancient past. Scientists have discovered genetic bottlenecks in human history, points where the entire human population appears to have been reduced to a small number of breeding pairs. The most significant of these bottlenecks occurred approximately 70,000 years ago, but evidence suggests another occurred much more recently, possibly within the time frame suggested by biblical chronology. Even more intriguing, researchers have found that modern humans possess genetic markers from at least 3 different hominid species: standard human DNA, Neanderthal genetic material, and DNA from a mysterious third species called Denisovans. Orthodox evolutionary theory struggles to explain how these 3 distinct genetic lines came to be combined in modern humans. But if the accounts in Genesis and Enoch are accurate, We're looking at the genetic remnants of the corruption that characterized the pre-flood world. The level of violence and corruption in the antediluvian world apparently became so extreme that drastic action was required. Genesis tells us that the earth was filled with violence and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Hebrew word for violence used here is Hamas, not random criminal activity, but systematic, organized oppression and injustice. Ancient texts outside the Bible provide even more disturbing details. The book of Jasher, referenced twice in the Old Testament as a reliable historical source, describes a pre-flood world where the giants ruled over humans as gods, demanding worship and human sacrifice. It tells of genetic experiments that created creatures that were part human, part animal, abominations that consumed both animals and humans for sustenance. The Book of Jubilees, preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox canon, describes how these hybrid beings taught humans to consume blood and to wage war against one another. It speaks of a world where cannibalism became commonplace and where the natural order of creation was completely overturned. According to these sources, the flood wasn't divine cruelty. It was divine mercy, stopping a corruption that would have made human redemption impossible. But here's what makes these ancient accounts particularly unsettling. They describe technologies and capabilities that sound remarkably similar to what we're developing today. Genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, human enhancement, and life extension technologies are advancing at unprecedented rates. Scientists are already creating human-animal hybrids for research purposes. The military is developing exoskeletons that give soldiers superhuman strength. Researchers are working on brain-computer interfaces that could fundamentally alter human consciousness. Are we approaching the same technological and spiritual crossroads that the antediluvian world faced? The timing of the flood itself provides crucial insights into the pre-flood world. Genesis tells us that Noah was given 120 years to build the ark, not because it took that long to construct, but because that's how long God waited before bringing judgment. For over a century, Noah preached righteousness to his contemporaries while building a massive vessel in preparation for a flood that had never happened before. According to the biblical account, it had never even rained before the flood. The earth was watered by springs and morning mist. The concept of water falling from the sky was completely foreign to pre-flood humanity. When Noah warned of coming judgment through a worldwide deluge, he was describing something literally unimaginable to his contemporaries. Yet despite 120 years of warning, despite watching Noah's family dedicate their lives to preparing for this catastrophe, despite seeing the animals come to the ark of their own accord, the entire pre-flood population except for 8 people chose to ignore the warnings. Jesus referenced this when he said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away." This wasn't ignorance born of lack of information. This was willful rejection of clear evidence in favor of continuing in established patterns of behavior. The pre-flood world had become so committed to its technological advancement and spiritual corruption that it literally couldn't conceive of divine judgment, even when the evidence was overwhelming. The actual mechanics of the flood revealed just how dramatically different the pre-flood world really was. Genesis describes the breaking up of all the springs of the great deep and the opening of the floodgates of the heavens. The Hebrew phrase Mayan Rabba Tehom refers to massive underground water sources being released with explosive force. Geological evidence suggests that the pre-flood world had vast subterranean ocean systems that were catastrophically released during the flood. The collapse of the vapor canopy would have been equally catastrophic. Billions of tons of water that had been suspended in the upper atmosphere suddenly condensed and fell to Earth. The atmospheric pressure changes alone would have been deadly to most life forms. The greenhouse effect that had maintained global tropical conditions disappeared overnight, creating the first ice age in Earth's history. But perhaps most significantly, the increased cosmic radiation that began penetrating Earth's atmosphere after the canopy collapsed immediately began shortening human lifespans. The genealogies in Genesis show a dramatic decline in human longevity after the flood. Noah lived 950 years, but his descendants lived progressively shorter lives until human lifespan stabilized at roughly 70-80 years, exactly what we see today. The flood didn't just destroy the pre-flood civilization, it fundamentally altered the physical conditions that had allowed that civilization to develop. The high oxygen atmosphere, the greenhouse climate, the protection from cosmic radiation, the vast water sources, all of it was permanently changed. Humanity had to start over in a world with dramatically different physical laws and limitations. Yet even this wasn't the end of the story. Genesis tells us that some of the Nephilim survived the flood. Numbers 13:33 records that when the Israelites scouted the Promised Land, they found giants there, descendants of Anak, who they identified as Nephilim. Deuteronomy mentions King Og of Bashan, whose iron bedstead was over 13 feet long. The Philistine warrior Goliath and his brothers were described as giants, with characteristics that clearly mark them as non-human. How did these beings survive a flood that destroyed everything else? The answer may lie in the fact that the corruption wasn't limited to the pre-flood world. Ancient texts suggest that some of the Watchers who had originally corrupted humanity were imprisoned during the flood, but others remained active afterward, continuing their work of genetic manipulation and human corruption. This explains the seemingly impossible task that God gave to the Israelites when they entered Canaan, to completely destroy certain populations without mercy or intermarriage. From a modern humanitarian perspective, these commands seem harsh and unjust. But if these populations carried corrupted DNA that could recontaminate the human gene pool, then their complete destruction was necessary to preserve the possibility of human redemption. Archaeological evidence supports the existence of these post-flood giant populations. Excavations throughout the Middle East have uncovered fortified cities with walls and gates designed for beings much larger than normal humans. Ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian artwork consistently depicts interactions between normal-sized humans and beings of enormous stature. Even the construction techniques used in megalithic sites like Baalbek and Sacsayhuaman suggest builders with capabilities far exceeding normal human strength. What's particularly fascinating is how accurately ancient texts predicted technological developments we're only now achieving. The book of Daniel speaks of a time when knowledge shall increase and people will run to and fro across the earth. Predictions that seemed impossible until the modern era of rapid transportation and information technology. Jesus warned that the end times would be as in the days of Noah, a statement that gains new significance as we develop genetic engineering capabilities similar to those described in pre-flood texts. The parallels between our current technological trajectory and the conditions described in the antediluvian world are striking. We're developing artificial intelligence that may soon achieve consciousness. We're extending human lifespans through genetic therapy. We're creating human-animal chimeras for research purposes. We're enhancing human capabilities through cybernetic implants. We're even discussing the possibility of uploading human consciousness to digital platforms. Military applications of these technologies are advancing even faster. DARPA, the Pentagon's advanced research arm, is actively developing soldier enhancement programs designed to create warriors with superhuman strength, endurance, and cognitive abilities. Brain-computer interfaces are being tested that could allow direct neural control of weapons systems. Genetic modifications are being explored that could make soldiers resistant to biological weapons or able to survive in hostile environments. Perhaps most disturbing, scientists are now able to modify human embryos at the genetic level, potentially creating enhanced humans with capabilities unknown in natural human populations. The same technologies that could eliminate genetic diseases could also be used to create beings with enhanced intelligence, strength, or sensory capabilities. We're approaching the ability to do exactly what the Book of Enoch accuses the pre-flood watchers of doing, systematically altering human DNA to create hybrid beings. The spiritual implications are equally significant. Ancient texts suggest that the pre-flood world's technological advancement was accompanied by corresponding spiritual corruption. The Book of Enoch describes how the forbidden knowledge taught by the Watchers led humanity away from worship of the true God toward occult practices, violence, and ultimately the worship of the fallen angels themselves. Modern surveys consistently show declining religious belief in technologically advanced societies. As our capabilities increase, our sense of dependence on divine guidance decreases. We're developing technologies that promise to solve problems traditionally addressed through spiritual means, extending life, enhancing human capabilities, even achieving forms of immortality through consciousness transfer or genetic manipulation. Yet the ancient warnings suggest there are spiritual laws that govern the use of such knowledge. Technologies that seem beneficial in isolation may have consequences that only become apparent when they reach critical mass. The pre-flood world apparently crossed a line where technological capability exceeded spiritual wisdom, creating conditions that made destruction preferable to continued existence. What's remarkable about the biblical flood account is its insistence that the judgment wasn't arbitrary divine wrath, but rather the natural consequence of choices made by free-willed beings. The corruption became so extensive that it was self-perpetuating and ultimately self-destructive. The flood was divine intervention to prevent a corruption that would have made redemption impossible. But the most sobering aspect of these ancient accounts is their unanimous insistence that similar conditions will arise again before the end of human history. Jesus explicitly stated that the end times would replicate the conditions of Noah's day. The book of Revelation describes end-time events that include the return of supernatural beings, the rise of a global government with totalitarian control, and people who, despite witnessing miraculous judgments, refuse to repent of their rebellion against God. Are we approaching those conditions now? The parallels are difficult to ignore. Global government structures are developing rapidly through international organizations and treaties. Surveillance technologies make totalitarian control more feasible than ever before. Genetic engineering is approaching the capability to fundamentally alter human nature. And perhaps most significantly, despite unprecedented access to information about spiritual matters, large portions of humanity are choosing materialistic worldviews that deny the existence of spiritual reality altogether. The pre-flood world wasn't destroyed because it was primitive and barbaric. It was destroyed because it was advanced and corrupt. It had achieved remarkable technological capabilities, but used them in ways that violated the fundamental spiritual laws governing creation. Its people lived long lives, possessed great knowledge, and wielded tremendous power. But they used these gifts to corrupt rather than fulfill their divine purpose. This is what makes the antediluvian world truly relevant to our current situation. We're not looking at ancient mythology or primitive superstition. We're examining the historical record of a civilization that may have surpassed our own achievements, only to discover that technological advancement without corresponding spiritual wisdom leads inevitably to destruction. The question facing our generation isn't whether we have the capability to avoid the mistakes of the pre-flood world. The question is whether we have the wisdom to recognize when we're making those same mistakes and the courage to change course before it's too late. The ancient texts suggest that time is shorter than we imagine, and the stakes are higher than we realize. The story of the antediluvian world isn't just ancient history. It's a warning, a roadmap, and perhaps most importantly, a reminder that some knowledge comes with a price that may be too high to pay. As we stand on the threshold of capabilities that could fundamentally alter human nature itself, the voices of the ancients whisper across the millennia with urgent relevance. As it was in the days of Noah, the choice of how to respond to that warning remains ours. But if the ancient records are accurate, we won't have unlimited time to decide. The window of opportunity for course correction may be narrower than we think, and the consequences of the wrong choice may be more final than we're prepared to accept. The antediluvian world stands as both inspiration and warning, a testament to the incredible potential of human achievement and the equally incredible danger of achieving it apart from divine wisdom. In the end, that may be the most important lesson the pre-flood world has to teach us, that knowledge without wisdom, power without restraint, and achievement without purpose lead inevitably to the same destination that ancient world reached, a point where destruction becomes the only path to redemption. We've journeyed through one of history's most suppressed stories today, uncovering truths that challenge everything we think we know about our past and our future. The antediluvian world wasn't the primitive society we've been taught to imagine. It was a technological civilization whose achievements and failures offer crucial lessons for our own time. If these insights have opened your eyes to new possibilities, consider subscribing to Professor Archive for more deep dives into history's hidden chapters. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, the truth is often stranger and more relevant than we dare to imagine. Thank you for watching.